Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Sophia Mempuh Kwachuh's play Bonganyi. So Bonganyi is a dance drama. Cameroon, like many cultures in Africa, many cultures in Asia, many cultures in, I think even the Middle East, have developed pretty extensive repertoires of dance-based theater, right? So ballet is a comparable one. Musicals are a comparable one in the Western tradition. But particularly in African drama, dance often has either a ritualistic purpose or a ritualistic heritage. And I think that's true in some forms of South Asian and East Asian performance as well, where the dance is culturally informed. And in the case of Bonganyi, the primary dances that we see serve a couple of major purposes. One is there's dancing for funerary rites, because this is a ghost story in many ways. As Kwachuh says in her critical introduction, ever since pre-colonial times, it is believed that after a person dies, you could invoke the person's spirit and they would come back and recount the events leading to their death. So this is a story that is introduced and to a greater or lesser extent narrated by Bonganyi, who is a young slave woman. She wants to win a dance contest in front of the local king, because if she can win that dance contest, the tradition is that the king will award the winner whatever they want. And what she wants is freedom for herself and her family. So that is Bonganyi's motive. So that's the sort of second type of dance we have. And then the third type of dance that we have in this play really is courtship dances. Because a number of the other characters in the play are pursuing Bonganyi, mostly romantically or in a sort of distorted romantic way. And Tem is her sort of most unproblematic suitor. Atem is not necessarily interested in her romantically, but he is very much like he's a affluenza person, not influenza, affluenza person, right? He's like every third word or every third phrase out of his mouth is "my father's wonderful sugarcane plantation," and he's very obnoxious, and so he believes accurately that Bonganyi has damaged one of the sugarcane plants, and he wants to take revenge on her on behalf of his father. So he is pursuing her for that. Asong is the son of a great warrior. He also spends a decent amount of time talking about his dad, but his family basically brought Bonganyi's family a bunch of marriage gifts and things like this in an attempt to pursue her hand, and Bonganyi said no. She refused to marry Asong. So he is now trying to take revenge on her for that. And then Mofor, he basically had given Bonganyi a bunch of gifts personally, right? He'd given her a bunch of stuff in the hope that she would marry him, and then she abandoned him. So, I mean, Bonganyi is not a great person necessarily. Like, her treatment of Mofor is kind of shit based on what we find out in the play. But she is a character who is primarily driven by a desire to control her own fate, right? So as a woman in a patriarchal society, as a slave, Bonganyi is not in a position to make decisions for herself, to decide her future, these kinds of things. And so much of what she does in this play is oriented around that desire to have agency that is otherwise denied to her by her society and her position in that society. And so in that sense, like this is Bonganyi is the final play in this collection, contemporary plays by African women. And one of the things that we see across this collection, which by the way is really, really good, I highly recommend it. But one of the things that we see across this collection is that desire to achieve agency, to construct agency, to seize control of one's own destiny against the forces of patriarchy, the forces of religious oppression, the forces of internalized misogyny, the forces of capitalism, the forces of colonialism or neo-colonialism, etc., etc. These playwrights across the board, and Kwachuh in this specific video, all have this interest in what it means to construct worlds in which women can determine their own fate, make their own choices free of coercion, and seize their own futures. And again, Bonganyi struggles against very, very specific forces that prevent her from doing that. So this is also a ghost story, and it is a ghost story that is highly ritualized in its presentation of the ghostliness of Bonganyi. So in this way, this sort of differs from like horror in the Western tradition, right? It's not, I mean, often there's like, you get horror movies where there's like a ritual that raises the dead or something like this, something like children shouldn't play with dead things or whatever it is. But in Bonganyi, the actual presentation itself is highly ritualized. So what it starts with is a dirge song sung in a sort of call and response pattern between a solo singer and the chorus. And it is in a Cameroonian language. I don't know which one. I think there may be... No, there does not seem to be a glossary. So sometimes with the plays in this, there is sort of a glossary of translating from whichever language that playwright has incorporated, but here we don't have it. But there is an opening ritual dirge, right? And then what we have is it says, both lines come to center stage. They stop, still holding the corpse as if performing a ritual. They stand facing each other, all the while singing. The air is tense. We can hear birds of the night chanting songs of sadness far off. They take the corpse to downstage right and drop it on the floor. While bent, the second song is tuned by the solo and they start singing. So again, this, I mean, it even says, as if performing a ritual. But this sort of choreographed movement of lines of people moving props. That sounds like a callous way of putting it, but in ritual terms, the corpse of a deceased person becomes a prop in that ritual, in a sense, right? So this sort of specific movements in order to fulfill ritual functions. All of these things are very much ritual aspects, right? And what we then have introduced is an individual component. So Bonganyi comes on, or we might more accurately say the ghost of Bonganyi comes on. It says here, a young girl skips from the group into the circle. She stands in the middle where the corpse is supposed to be. She sings the dirge aloud and starts speaking while the others are humming the tune. And this is a long bit. Bonganyi has a long thing here. It is about 9 pages out of a 36-page play in this printed edition. That's a quarter of the total length of this show. And from an acting perspective, one of the things that would be really, really challenging about Bonganyi's opening portion is that not only is it incredibly long, but there's not a real strong internal logic to a lot of it. What I mean by that, not that it's incoherent or that it doesn't make sense, but because it is short lines, almost like lines of poetry, they don't always logically follow from what has been said before. Like new ideas are introduced, tangents are taken, divergences, things like this. And so it's not a sort of speech in which the ideas are developed consistently and in a way that if you forgot a line, you could logically make a good guess at what belongs there. So I'll read you a little bit of it, not the whole thing, because it is long. But so this is the start of it. Isn't this wonderful? Beauty is in all its display, but who can stand as a witness to fineness? Isn't this great? What am I talking about? I breathe painfully with words that transcend my body. I gasp as the last words transposed in my memory flow out to show thoughts of my mind kept hidden in the confines of my existence. This is marvelous. I stand in memory of me, I and myself. Since I have no advocate to my cause, I might as well defend my case. A case I know not if the judge shall forbear. For forbearance indeed comes in the presence and assistance of the real. Am I real? Are you real? Unfortunately, I bear no body to proceed with an answer. I faint to speak. I gasp for my last words. Words of love. Love of me. Me can find in the real realism of my truth. A truth only I, you, us, we can understand. We who stood firm, but whom the earth decided to swallow up to the knees. And us who spent the rest of our time half-human on our knees, but bestowed with beauty untold, beautiful, marvelous, interesting. And then she laughs out loud, looking meaningfully at the audience. So, again, this is it's cool. It sounds really, really good, actually. But it, from an acting perspective, is going to be quite difficult to do because it is just straight up memorization without necessarily having, again, that sort of, okay, I'm saying this because I just said this type logic. And so that all speeches like that are always difficult, right? When you change topics or change the focus of what you're saying within the middle of a passage, that's difficult as an actor. That being said, this opening portion introduces a lot of the key themes of the play. Bonganyi's desire for freedom, for beauty, for self-expression, her desire to be able to dance and to dance for herself. The fact that she is pursued by men, not necessarily with her consent, and not necessarily because she desires to be. All of that is introduced in this first portion. And it is, again, introduced in these very poetic, meditative, cerebral ways, right? It's not that Bonganyi comes out and says, I want my freedom, I was a slave, I want to dance, I was constrained, men pursued me against my will. No, she doesn't say those things, but she builds those ideas in through imagery, through metaphor, all of these literary devices that start constructing who this character is. That Bonganyi's ghost gives us this information about her, so that when we then shift sort of retrospectively into Bonganyi's life and the events surrounding her death, we have much more information about this character. So the other thing I want to mention about this is a dance drama. I'd said that before, and I'm not a scholar of dance. It is not something that I know much about. It's not something that I have a tremendous appreciation of. Not because I don't like it, but because I don't understand it. I don't have a background in it or training in it to really understand it in any meaningful way. But one of the things that I find really interesting here is that Kwachuh's stage directions for a lot of the dance give more of a mood than an actual description. So this one, for instance, Bonganyi and Ntem are doing a sort of courtship dance, right, where he is pursuing her romantically. And it says here, he moves around her as he speaks, dancing and eager to feel her. His dances take him to her, and their hands meet. They both execute dance steps as if they were two blind people searching each other's heart and soul. They dance as two hearts who have come together who can't seem to accept the separation. They dance as two lovers who have been ordered to part ways. The dance movements take them apart in a separation that is difficult to accept. So none of that tells us what this dance should actually look like. It gives us the vibe, right? It gives us the mood. And I think that's probably quite a common approach to dance drama, because what I presume you would want to do as a director of Bonganyi would be to say, all right, given the dancers in this bit that we have cast, given their capabilities, their training, their background, whatever it is, and given the cultural context that we are performing this in, is this in Kwachuh's native Cameroon with her cultural context, or are you putting this somewhere else? You could theoretically change the location, although that would undermine some of the cultural specificity of Cameroonian folklore surrounding ghosts, etc. But you could do it if you wanted to, right? But what is going to be meaningful for your audience, right? So if the objective is convey this mood through the dance, then that gives directors or dance choreographers or whoever it is that makes those decisions for a particular production a tremendous amount of latitude in terms of how to actually achieve that objective. So I think that's really, really good. Sort of giving that freedom to directors, choreographers, whoever it is, to make this show work.